computer. So let's just refresh the room and welcome to CogX 2021, the global gathering of entrepreneurs and leaders and creatives and tech people and investors. It's just an incredible place to be. And here on the virtual booth for Neon Juno, we're celebrating the event and all things exponential leadership by having conversations with good friends of ours. And so today we've got a number of different topics, but I'm especially excited. Don't tell the others, you're my favorite, but don't tell the others. I'm especially excited to be joined by Sam Meikle, who is just, well, I'm going to say just a gorgeous human being. The work that she's been doing around engagement and around giving a voice to people, to patients, to staff, has been so uplifting and so important. Often the conversations that go on around disruption and transformation focus far too heavily on the processes and on the tech. But Sam, with your business Spark the Difference, you've really been shifting that focus to look at how we can humanize the organizations that we work in and humanize change, humanize technology. So welcome, Sam. Tell us a little bit more about you and your journey.
Thank you, Claire. I'm so happy to be here. And it's over 20 degrees in South London today, so we are warm, which is a lovely change. I'm really intrigued by the theme of this CogX of how do we get the next 10 years right? Because as you know, I've been exploring what was right about the last 10 years. And I started my journey in IT and technology, software delivery and project management. And exactly as you were saying, there's so much focus on the processes, the systems, how far can we push innovation? And I think what we miss is sometimes what's people's experience of that change, of the technology. I often get into quite heated conversations with colleagues who are saying, you know, nobody asked for the iPhone, and isn't innovation amazing? I think there's a lot of systems and processes that can be improved to enhance people's lived experience, their days, their lives, and what's happening there. So a bit on my journey, I had a software development background and started working across London on something called information governance, which is not the most exciting of topics. When you say you work on information governance at a party or a family gathering, people don't tend to have a lot of follow-up questions. But essentially it's how do you share information safely, securely, and confidentially? And there was a lot of change going on about 10 years ago in this space. And as we started to bring information governance professionals together, what I was really interested in is their stories. Why do people work in this field? What has been their experience that's led up to this point? And it was there that I really became quite passionate about understanding what matters to people who both give and receive care. So giving care, all of the healthcare professionals, whether you're clinical, managerial, frontline, executives, and patients who receive the care, and extending out to their families. And I think sometimes we can get lost in those systems and processes and forget that it's people at the heart of it. What I've pulled together for today is 3 lessons of engagement that I've learned over the last 5-6 years. So at Spark the Difference, we help decision makers understand what matters to people who give and receive care, and then help them act on and change as a result of understanding what is important. And we do that with lots of engagement strategies and tools and tactics and creative solutions. I've got some boards here behind me, so that it's not just about producing a board report, but something that engages people to start a conversation.
And what I love, before we dive into those three areas, what I love about that is just the creativity that flows and the desire for the message to come across in a way that it has maximum impact, that it's accessible to everyone, so that they're excited. And you talk about it's not in the format of a document, and a friend of mine has just recently joined as a non-exec director for a hospital trust, and the packs of papers that go through, they're 500 pages thick as reports. And so, and I've worked with strategic leaders for 2 decades now, and you know that they haven't read the content. You know that at the very best, they've gone to the foreword and the exec summary, to the conclusions and recommendations, that's it. Or they've only read one segment of it that they're most interested in and they think they can offer value. And so to see complexity distilled in that way, so that it's accessible and that the voices come alive, is just, it's so refreshing to see. It really is.
Thank you. I remember one board meeting that I was in, exactly that. They said, Sam, your agenda item is up. Can all board members turn to page 212 of your packs? I thought, who is reading the night before to page 212 of your pack? So in these meetings, I often stand up with a big visual board and take people through a journey of, this is what we hear the problem is, this is how people are experiencing it, this is the feedback of their lived experience here. How do we take some decisions forward? The chairs don't always appreciate when I stand up in the middle of their board meetings, but you've got to be a little bit different, don't you?
Oh, hell yeah. You have to be different, because I think otherwise you sleepwalk. Many people in these governance roles just go between meeting after meeting after meeting, and you see that even though they have £1 billion of spend and tens of thousands of people at their command, as it were, not really at their command, but you see that everyone's just bored. B-O-R-E-D, not B-O-A-R-D. And so, you really want to get that fire lit up. So, how share your top tips then. How do people actually start moving into engagement and getting that voice through?
I think it's almost the reverse of a tip. So I think where engagement often goes wrong is that people don't start. So number one is an acknowledgement that feedback can be really hard. Nobody in the NHS, the very, very vast majority of people in the NHS don't come to work to make things more difficult. They don't think, how can I create more and more hurdles that will prevent people getting the services that they need? That's not why we do the work that we do. And when you're trying to do your best, even though the circumstances may be against you, it's still really hard not to take feedback personally. And it requires a vulnerability to say, tell me your experience and tell me how we can do this better together. So Spark offers a training course for engagement champions in the NHS, which is about helping frontline staff start to be open to receiving feedback and asking for feedback. And the biggest thing that we continually hear is, I don't want to ask for feedback because I can't guarantee to fix it all. Yeah. So you're opening a Pandora's box of, you don't understand the systems, you don't understand how many staff we've got sick today, there's no way I can get funding for that, there's no way the board's going to approve that. So you're almost setting up to let people down when they share their vulnerable experience. So the first tip, I suppose, is not committing to fix things, which sounds a bit strange. So and it's a balance. You don't want to just create a vacuum of feedback where people tell you their challenging experiences, tell you the problems, and nothing happens. But I think for many staff, it's quite a challenge to be open to it because you can't change everything. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is creating space for voices to be heard. And so this is an example we did in East London, and there's loads and loads and loads of issues, but we can't commit to fixing them all. But I would say to people, don't underestimate the value of creating space for people's voice to be heard and for their experience that matters to them to matter to somebody. And often in these engagements, we use creative solutions like portrait photography or audio recordings or visual boards, because people can see their feedback going up on the wall straight away. You know that it's not captured on a clipboard in a hospital waiting room on a Leichhardt scale. But you can see, hey, the chief exec said that, and there's my comment right next to it. And that is valuable in itself. Amazing if it goes on to create solutions, but I think don't underestimate creating that space to really understand what's happening.
Yeah. And can we unpack that around portraits? That's a really interesting tool. It's a really interesting channel for voices with a static image. You know, can that be as impactful?
I think it depends on the context. So I've used it in a number of ways. The first was I created an exhibition on Elephant and Castle Roundabout when it was going through a regeneration time. So the place that we created, it no longer exists. It's all with new builds. But 5-6 years ago, we had a shipping container on Elephant and Castle Roundabout and these gorgeous black and white portrait photography. I didn't take these ones. We actually got a fashion photographer to come and have ordinary NHS staff who are extraordinary in their own right, just being witnessed by a fashion photographer and having, you know, who gets to do that in the course of a normal day. And we could start to then see people's Twitter profiles, their LinkedIn profiles would be changing to these really striking black and white portrait photography. The board, the chair of a CCG clinical commissioning group came to the exhibition and he said, Sam, can we host our next board meeting here? Because I want my board members to sit around a table and see the faces of people in our community looking down on them. So when we're making decisions, we can look into the eye of the person who's blown up to be, you know, 1 meter by 1.5 and say, we're making this decision for people who are in an experience like you. I also use it for when, and this is all with consent, so everything that we do in a creative way is with full written consent of the people whose stories we're sharing. So we did another exhibition for people who, the project was on end of life, and people who were on the palliative care pathway or family members who had recently lost a relative or a close friend. And I think sometimes we put patients in a very, very vulnerable situation where we invite them to speak to a board or we invite them to speak to a staff meeting with 200 staff, and they're not trained and they're not supported to be a public speaker. So when you've got someone on stage sharing their very, very vulnerable story, we're recreating that trauma in a way. So we started to explore it of how do we capture the vulnerability, the beauty of that human and their story, whether it's in written word or with audio. And with their consent, that image can then go far beyond what that one person can do in different scenarios. So I think it can be an extraordinarily powerful tool. And one more story, if I can. So thinking back to the Humans of Healthcare exhibition on Elephant and Castle Roundabout, we had a group of kids, young adults from a troubled estate nearby, and we were working with an organization and they were looking at what does leadership mean to these kids? How can we give these kids opportunities to step outside their environment? And so we were showing them around the exhibition, and these are kids from very often underprivileged environments, and they came to a huge big portrait of a man in a suit wearing glasses, a white man. And they were like, oh, look at him, who's he? He thinks he's all very good. Doesn't look at his, it's kind of a shiny suit and he's wearing a tie and oh, I don't really want to listen to him. And I said, tell me about him. What's going on for you? So they said he's so far removed from their experience. Combined then with the audio, we listened to the audio together. And in this particular example, Mark is a doctor and he was sharing the moment that he had to first tell a patient she was dying. And he starts to cry in this story. And so these kids are standing around looking at this man in a shiny suit with his tie and his glasses and going, oh, he's all posh, isn't he? And they're listening to the raw emotion of him going, I've never had to do that. And all of the textbooks and all of the processes that he'd been trained to him in that moment failed him. And he's like, human to human, this is my experience.
Yeah.
And what I didn't expect, which has gone on to guide a huge amount of the work we do, is those kids then were like, you want to hear a story? Let me tell you my story. And they responded to that moment of vulnerability with vulnerability in their own way, and then wanted their stories to be witnessed. And it was really a powerful moment for me to think you don't have to look like the person whose story you're listening to connect with them. You don't have to, that moment, that power of vulnerability and humanity can transcend everything. And that's what, has really, really driven a lot of Spark's future work.
What resonates for me really clearly in that is, you might not know this, but over 25 years ago, I was a fresh young degree student. I studied law and criminology, and at the time we were looking at the criminal justice system and the courts especially, and examining how the courtroom is just like a theatre in terms of the costume, in terms of the roles, in terms of the expectations and the flair, and all of that gets layered on, and that vulnerable human being kind of gets cloaked in a way, and it's so easy to forget that there's a human being in there, definitely. And sorry.
No, I could tell stories all day. You asked the question.
So why is it especially important now?
I think it's even more important now than ever because we are in unprecedented times with the global pandemic. And even before that, we knew the NHS was in crisis. The budget isn't enough. We can't do enough. We've got staff shortages. And to bring my personal experience into it, I was really poorly with COVID. It really affected me very, very severely. And it's taken nearly a year for me to be up and running again and re-engaging with my business. And what I observed during my recovery was I had a lot of anger for the people who were like, oh, I've had a really tough year. I had to learn how to make banana bread. And it was really annoying doing Zoom calls. I'm like, I nearly didn't make it. Then I had to learn to redo everything again. I'm still not at my full capacity. And I really had to learn what is my benchmark of resilience and suffering, and not to judge that against someone else's benchmark. So for someone who has never had significant trauma in their life, working from home with 2 kids and doing teaching and going, what on earth am I going to bake today because we need something, there's no shops open, is the most significant event that they can experience. And how do we not judge my suffering and my pain against somebody else's suffering and pain? And I think listening to the stories and experiences of people in the NHS now, you can start to see, well, my service was really affected. We were all redeployed. And look at that service over there. Their patients didn't die. They didn't have any staff who died. They've just been doing their job. Some of them you don't even need to come in, you're all working from home. So we're starting to see this pain and trauma of, you had it easier than me, or I've had it tougher, or I don't agree with the policy direction. And I think, I'm originally from Australia, so we have this word of reckoning, of reckon. We kind of need to have a reckoning of listening to what those experiences are for people, and witnessing the pain and the trauma from different people, and not to judge it in terms of I was the most traumatized by COVID and everybody else wasn't, so I'm most important in the healing process. Because I think if we come in at board level action plans of, here's our strategic priorities for the next 5 years, and this is how we need to do it, we have a health service that is grieving, that is overworked, that is beyond the fragility of 18 months ago. And if we don't pause to find those human interactions and moments, we're never going to create the revolution or even take the steps forward that is going to be needed to find our new normal.
And also, is it fair to say that there's a risk that if we don't consciously listen for as many diverse voices as we can, we'll miss perhaps those voices that aren't the loudest, that don't have advocates or strong political support behind them, and we, you know, with scarce resources, we channel those to whoever shouts loudest.
Completely. And that ties me super nicely, and you didn't know this in advance, to my lesson number 3, which is that there is a place for formal engagement mechanisms and channels, both staff and patients. I believe that. I also believe and have observed that often these are too narrow, they're too late in the process. They exclude the voices that we want to hear from most, the people most affected by the changes or the service in the way it's being delivered. And so in addition to reimagining what those formal processes can look like, how can we put something alongside that that is much more inclusive, much more open to a conversation about how's it been, how's it going, what do you most need from this service and care?
Yeah, a grand reset, you know, that's based on collective voice, for sure. Do you think we can afford that?
I wish I had a money tree. And not to be too BBC question time for you, I don't know if we can afford not to. And what we've seen through Spark the Difference in the last 6 years are so many examples where if we spark that conversation, huge changes in system can happen. So 2 very quick examples. We were working with an inpatient unit, and as a result of listening to staff and patients very openly, the trust was able to halve their average length of stay from 42 days down to 21 days. So from a board level perspective, that's huge. That is ticking all of our innovation boxes, process redesign boxes. But the lived experience for the patients who were not in hospital for weeks and weeks on end, the lived experience for families who know what's happening to mum or dad or auntie when they're coming back, for me, is what is the most rewarding beyond the cost measures and the reduction in that way. And another example is in primary care. So in East London, as a result of listening to patients on what matters, one practice completely changed their phone system, completely changed all of their online appointment booking and record systems. So much so, and it's quite a long story, but the benefit was, before COVID hit, they were fully online. They were doing virtual consultations, so that when this pandemic came, they were like, we know how to do this. It's just more of the same for us. And they weren't so taken aback in the way that so many NHS organizations and teams were.
So if I might interpret that, and correct me if I've got this wrong, but by listening, they were able to adjust and change their processes to almost be proactive in that change, so that in the eventuality that something else happened, they were already ready. And what strikes me in both of those examples is the first one picks up the huge inefficiencies that there already are within a system. The hospital example, you can imagine hundreds of thousands being spent on external consultants and change agents in order to make that change happen, whereas in relative cost terms, the engagement exercise, having that real conversation would have been a drop in the ocean. And then also, one of the things around the pandemic is for many businesses, they didn't expect or anticipate a pandemic to hit, and they didn't expect to have to make the changes that they had to. And yet there were always small cues going on that, there were changes afoot across nature. It's almost like, and I'm not saying it's a seasonal pattern, but often you can pick up little markers of change in attitude or change in confidence that are there, that don't need the huge wake-up call, but they are so subtle that you need to stop to listen out for them. But they're ever present. Is that fair?
Absolutely. The example I gave in primary care, I think I said it was just listening to one patient. There was many steps then in between. If it was one patient's story, that we then went to find other patients. What is your experience? And I think it's that curiosity and openness, which, thank you, Claire, brings me to my second point of learning lessons, which is don't assume, don't go into engagement exercises assuming you know what the result is going to be.
Sorry. I'll just interrupt your flow, but please carry on. It's just like, don't assume you know what it's going to be, and don't assume that you can ask the questions to make sure you're proved right in engagement conversations. I've seen both happen in different environments, but yeah, sorry.
Well, and there are endless examples of this. And in the inpatient unit, we were working with staff before we started speaking with patients on this to say, this is what we're doing. And they said, Sam, I can tell you, they're going to say the food is crap because it's hospital food and the bells at night are too loud on the boards. Maybe they'll tell us some different things. Maybe they'll ask for different opportunities. So if you go in saying, how do you feel about the food? And you're asking very closed questions on your Likert scales, you don't have that curious mindset of what's going on for the person, for their family, for their community, for all the connected different services. And you might be getting surface level, you might be putting a Band-Aid on a surface level problem, when if you go a little bit deeper, you can get to the root cause, which may be a bigger fix, or it might just be a simple thing that can drive big change.
So tell me, I've got two last questions. The first question is, you are now the Minister for Health. What would be your wish for the next 6 to 9 months?
I would wish that everyone had the courage and curiosity to have vulnerable conversations. Vulnerable conversations as a team to say, how are we doing? And maybe we're not actually all right. Okay, so we're not all right. What do we need to do now? Vulnerable conversations with the people that you are serving through care, patients, your service users, your communities. We're not okay. How are you? Because I don't think you're okay either. And I think we need, if I could have anything, it's a moment of reflection and kind of pause to process what's happening. And that's not to kind of shy away from action, because absolutely we need that. But I think we have so much grief and suffering that needs to be processed, that if we come in with the next innovation, the next wave of technology, the next solution and kind of process whizzes, we don't have the resilience to really drive that forward.
And kind of building a wall on really fragile foundations in a way. Yeah, that makes sense. So my last question then is, you talked about your business, but with the difference. What have we got to look out for over the next 6 months for the business? How do you see things shaping up? What can you share?
So I said I started with my background as in technology, and I spent a good number of years starting to work with the NHS on the adoption of technology. And we did a 3-year program where I think adoption of online GP record access went from like 1.3% to 1.9%. And we were celebrating. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there has been a quantum leap forward that would not have happened for technology if it were not for the pandemic, which is very full of negatives. So the positive from the pandemic is an openness to explore technology, an openness to explore different ways of doing and being. And there are opportunities coming up to start to scale some of our offerings with staff. So it doesn't need to be our team in a room with NHS teams. But how can we start to do a lot more of that virtually? How can we encourage skills and confidence in staff to do that for themselves as well?
Yeah.
So many practice managers in general practice and primary care will say to me, I didn't come on board to be facilitating people or learning how to use Teams or Zoom. Nobody told me that I would be doing that when I joined 20 years ago. And so I think it's really about supporting people, not forgetting the people with all of this step change that's coming through.
Yeah. And again, kind of making people the leaders, not making the tools the supreme or the leaders or the gods. It's people who use the tools. And in that example, to have that, to bring that voice alive, whether it's in a face-to-face meeting or on the phone or on Zoom, it can be brought through so well, and people can feel comfortable once they remember that they're at the core of it. I think in technology, many people feel quite daunted by technology, but again, it's just a tool. It's a pen, it's a calculator, it's a mouse.
Exactly. I've got one more short story, and then I have a question, some feedback for you, Claire. So we are starting to do much more patient engagement online, and typically in primary care, in a formal patient engagement mechanism, you might get 2 or 3 people coming once a month or once a quarter. And the work we've been doing in East London, 30, 40, 50 patients are coming to online meetings. And what has been extraordinary is who is coming to these meetings. So it's people who have high levels of anxiety or mental health. It's people who are housebound. It's people who've got childcare responsibilities, people whose English is not their first language and would never come into a formal town hall style meeting with all the commissioners and board members. But they're very happy to sit with their phone with the camera off and just type in the chat what their experiences are. Yeah. So I think we've got a real opportunity to be starting to open that up without holding on to it too tight as to the ways that people should engage, and that we're expecting everyone to be with camera and have 5 minutes of talking points and this and that.
That's exciting, and that's exciting because you are giving that voice, and we can bemoan how Twitter is full of bullies, and that people can very quickly throw stones because it's an anonymous platform. But that also provides a place of safety for those who are less comfortable with coming forward, particularly around health issues, and confidence issues. They don't want to necessarily fly a flag and say, look at me, I'm the best victim in the room. but they do want to find a way to get across those views. Now, I'm glad you shared that.
Thank you. And my last point was to acknowledge the work that you and Neon Juno are doing to support leaders in this very turbulent time. And I was reflecting this morning about all of the stories that we tell in our work that spark the difference. And in working with you, I think you've helped me really bring the stories that go on in my mind and the stories that don't get a platform, but can be doing a lot of damage or a lot of help, and holding the space to explore what those narratives are. You use the really lovely phrase of, as a leader, it's all about you and not about you at all. And I think the work you're doing in helping change makers and leaders is making sure that you're not putting too many hurdles in front of yourself so that you can get on and do the work that's really important. So I wanted to acknowledge that and thank you for all of your support and leadership.
Thank you. Sorry, no, thank you. Yeah, I'll let that sit. It's an absolute pleasure, and to work with leaders, and I know this probably is in danger of turning into a gush fest, but to work with leaders who are so innovative and brave, and to offer that extra dose of courage, that extra dose of calm, or that extra dose of energy to help them achieve the mission is reward in itself. And so so thank you for your feedback, for sure, and it's definitely a two-way process. So I want to thank you, Sam, for sharing your themes really around engagement and how important it is to develop and listen to the community you work in. And in this example, we've been looking at a community of patients and a community of NHS staff, but what came through very strongly in all of your feedback is the parallels that any leader can draw in terms of leading their organisation and saying that, hey, we're not okay, how are you? And just stepping forward to create a real human environment where people feel safe enough to be heard and to be creative, to feel a part of that organisation. And so thank you so much. We've overrun horribly, but it was too important a conversation to miss. For everybody here on YouTube, we are going to be saving extra details about Sam's participants in our description. So I'm going to stop recording now and we can get that going.